I love bourbon, but I'm not ready to restart my career and be a distiller. I have a bachelor's degree and I want to continue to use those skills in the whiskey industry. So check this out. The University of Louisville has an online distilled spirits business certificate, and this focuses on the business side of the spirits industry, like finance, marketing, and operations. This is perfect for anyone looking for more professional development, and if you ever want to get your MBA, their certificate credits transfer into U of L's online MBA program as elective hours. Learn more about this online 6-course certificate at ufl.me/bourbon pursuit.
Now, hold on, Kenny. We have to, anytime I talk to someone from Alabama, I got to find out, are you an Auburn fan or a Tide fan?
Neither. I don't give a shit.
This is episode 238 of Bourbon Pursuit. I'm one of your hosts, Kenny, and it's time for a bit of bourbon news. Lou Bryson, an acclaimed bourbon journalist and author, wrote a captivating story called America's First Family of Bourbon, The Beams. I'm going to give you a little bit of context about the article and hope that you go read the rest of it because it gives a historical timeline of James Beauregard Beam, better known as Jim Beam, and distilling bourbon before Prohibition, what he did after Prohibition ended, and how this family lineage just has ties spreading all across the bourbon industry. Now, during Prohibition, he tried other businesses, including a rock quarry and an orange grove that ultimately failed. So he found investors in Illinois to fund a new distillery after Prohibition ended. Along with his son and 2 nephews, they built a distillery in 120 days and opened on March 25th, 1935. Jim was 70 years old at the time. And before Prohibition, the Beam family brand had been Old Tub Bourbon Whiskey. To Jim's dismay, he learned that the rights to the name had been sold during Prohibition. Despite this setback, he was undeterred, and that's when the whiskey officially became Jim Beam Bourbon. The story then dives into this mid-1700s with Johannes Jacob Beam, and then from there, the family lineage starts really spreading, and talks about how they helped create early times distillery, Toddy's Liquor, Heaven Hill, and their ties into Stitzel-Weller, Maker's Mark, Frankfurt Distillery, J.W. Dant, Four Roses, Michter's, and so many more. You can read the full story with the link in our show notes to thedailybeast.com. Wilderness Trail, one of the founding distillery destinations on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail Craft Tour, has advanced to join the Kentucky Bourbon Trail Adventure, becoming the 18th stop on the world-famous journey that showcases America's only native spirit. Co-owners Shane Baker and Pat Heist are recognized globally as leading fermentation specialists through their original company, Firm Solutions, consulting with distilleries around the world to develop products and enhance production. And you can listen to Pat and Shane back on episodes 121 and 130. They're open for tours Tuesday through Saturday, and the visitor experience includes a 45-minute walking tour and an educational tasting seminar in the tasting room. You can learn more at wilderness-trail-distillery.com. Talladega Superspeedway has announced that Clyde Mays Whiskey has become its official whiskey. Roy Danish, Chief Executive Officer of Kunica Brands, which has Clyde Mays in its portfolio, said the partnership with Talladega Superspeedway is particularly resonant for Clyde Mays because they have a similar origin. Stock racing was invented by moonshiners who used fast cars to escape the law. Clyde May was an Alabama farmer and a moonshiner who dodged the law himself a few times. They are the official state spirit of Alabama, and Talladega is one of the most famous venues in the state. Clyde May himself would have been proud to know his legacy continues through this Talladega partnership. Now, you heard it when we first started the podcast, but I want to say thank you to our returning sponsor, the U of L College of Business and the online Distilled Spirits Business Certificate. We had a few listeners enroll last time, so perhaps it's time for you to give it a look. Make sure you go check it out at ufl.me/bourbon pursuit. Now, Red Hook Rye. That bottling might be what made LeNell a household name among bourbon unicorn chasers over the years, but LeNell has a story to tell when it comes to the spirits industry. Her story is filled with encounters that propelled her name and eventually put her little shop in Brooklyn on the map. We hear the story of owning a store in that area back in the day, how it was like, and how she has now gone back to her roots, opening up a store in Alabama. Now, before you go any further, this podcast does contain explicit language, so don't say we didn't warn you. you get to hear the real LeNell Camacho Santa Ana. All right, it's that time. Let's hear what Joe over Barrel has to say, and then you've got Fred Minnick with Above the Char.
I'm Joe Beatrice, founder of Barrel Craft Spirits. Each batch is its own unique expression of our blending process. Find out more at barrelbourbon.com.
I'm Fred Minnick, and this is Above the Char. Here we go into the Super Bowl. Oh my gosh, this is a great matchup. If you're a sports fan, you get to see two amazing rushers in the San Francisco 49ers up against one of the most explosive offenses I have seen in some time. I mean, Patrick Mahomes is this guy that, he may be down 25 points and he's like, oh yeah, I'm going to show you. And I got to tell you, I am so glad that we have the matchup that we have, because it is kind of like a football fan's dream. Great offense against great defense, and one really good offense against a really good defense that, what's going to give here? Anyway, this is not a football podcast. This is a bourbon podcast, so I should probably get to it. The reason why I bring up the Super Bowl, it wasn't until 2017 that the NFL even allowed spirits advertisers. So for years, they had a ban on distilled spirits advertising within the NFL. Now, you got to remember, too, spirits had not been advertising on television until 1996. The industry had put a self-imposed ban on advertising from spirits, having this kind of notion that, if they promoted themselves, they could be drawing the ire of the prohibitionists. This held true until the mid-1990s, until a small group from Crown Royal that we call the Code Breakers broke the code of the Distilled Spirits Council and did a small little test ad in the Corpus Christi, Texas market. That went into like the Spirits Council changing a lot of their code, and so now you see spirits being advertised consistently. However, sports teams still struggle to bring in booze advertisers, because what happens at these games? People get really drunk. They make fools of themselves. I mean, there have been many incidents of people getting hurt. I think there have been people being killed by, drunken assholes before. And so it's often a bad look in the eyes of people who own these NFL teams to associate themselves with the liquor brand. Well, in 2019, the NFL actually changed their belief. They relaxed their policy on alcohol sponsorships and allowed the league to expand the use, so basically allow a brand like Jim Beam to partner with a player. And that's the first time that anyone had ever done that. And if you recall, a few years ago, you had Richard Sherman on the podium talking about how the NFL wouldn't allow people to partner with alcohol brands. So I'm glad to see that the NFL has relaxed those policies. I hope that it will continue, because there is not many things better than enjoying a great football game with a good bourbon. So while you're watching the Super Bowl, think about it. You're actually kind of witnessing a little bit of spirits history too, because I'm sure we're going to see some cool spirits ads. Let's just hope they're not vodka. And that's this week's Above the Char. Hey, if you want to learn more about the history of bourbon and advertising, check out my book, Bourbon, The Rise, Fall, and Rebirth of American Whiskey. And make sure you're subscribing to my YouTube channel and checking out my new podcast. Just search my name, Fred Minnick. Until next week, cheers.
Welcome back to another episode of Bourbon Pursuit, the official podcast of bourbon. Kenny and Fred here today, and this is going to be talking to really, it's kind of like two facets of it. We talk a lot about having retailers on the show and sort of what has that meant in regards to the bourbon boom and the business, and really how they are changing their strategy of going forward, and how they're really marketing the products inside of their walls to these newer consumers. But on the other hand, our guest today also comes with a pretty storied past. She's had her name on sides of bottles and all these things before that has kind of took her to a new level of fame, where she's had write-ups in multiple magazines and articles and blogs and stuff like that. So I'm really excited to talk to our guest today. Fred, how did you come to know our guest?
Well, I think honestly, it was through Willett. Like I learned of her very early on when I was writing my book Whiskey Women, and she was kind of became like this kind of like folklore legend within the legends of bourbon. You know, I find our guest today to be one of the most underrated heroes of bourbon, and I'm a really American whiskey, and I genuinely mean that, because she's very humble. She doesn't like attention. She doesn't want to be in the limelight. She just loves whiskey, and at the end of the day, I think that's why most of us adore her.
Yeah, I think you said it right. It was funny when when I was talking to our guest LeNell today about getting her on the podcast, and I was trying to say like, oh, like, you know, I promised like it'll be good. Like, here's our numbers. She goes, I don't give a shit about your numbers. You know, it's really funny. She's just like, she didn't care. And most of the time you talk to a lot of people in this industry and they kind of want to know what your reach is. Like, what are you going to help them? And she's very humble about it. And hopefully that's really going to shine through as we start talking here. So without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce our guest. So today on the show, we have LeNell Camacho Santa Ana. She's the boss of LeNell's beverage boutique in Birmingham, Alabama. So LeNell, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Well, we're very excited to have you on. And kind of before we get into the story of you and LeNell's and the Willets and all that kind of stuff, kind of talk about like your introduction to whiskey. Can you remember that sort of first bottle, that first taste? You know, we've had other distillers on and they say, oh, we've had my grandpappy gave me a wee nip when I was a little young lad. Like what's your story there?
Come from a teetotaler background, so there was no drinking in my youth. I had an alcoholic grandfather, so my introduction to whiskey was him coming home drunk and beating the fuck out of my grandma. So there's some reality of our business right there. I did not drink until I was 21. So, you know, my best recollection of like a first whiskey would have been probably Jack Daniels, passed around a campfire, like many folks in the South.
Mm-hmm. Kind of talk about your you know, where you come from, your youth and all that sort of stuff as well. Because I think you kind of talked about a pretty interesting background.
I grew up here in Alabama, in North Alabama. I left Birmingham in 2000 and went to New York. I was in Birmingham for 10 years before I went to New York. I was in New York for about 10 years before I moved to Mexico, and now back in Alabama as of 2011.
Now, hold on, Kenny. We have to, anytime I talk to someone from Alabama, I got to find out, are you an Auburn fan or a Tide fan?
Neither. I don't give a shit.
Would you say you might be the only Alabama that does not care about college football?
Well, I've always been a critical thinker, and growing up, I never understood why my family were Crimson Tide fans when nobody in my family had graduated from high school, much less gone to college. So I always questioned, like, where did that start as some kind of like heritage thing? Like, who woke up one day and said, "Oh, roll Tide"? I don't know.
That's hilarious.
It made sense to me.
So I kind of want to also touch on sort of the history of you and how the LeNell's brand kind of got started. Can you really kind of take us back in the history books and sort of like where did the idea come from to open up the first boutique?
When I moved to New York, my goal was to really just deep dive into the industry and figure out my path. And I didn't move to New York in 2000 with the goal of opening my store, but I worked in retail, I worked in restaurant, I'd done bartending. I had a master's degree in public administration. I was in university admin before I left Alabama and went to New York. But it was time to really pursue my heart and just take the risk to jump into the industry with both feet. So after working pretty much all aspects of the business, including sales, I repped 5 different wine books in New York before I opened the store. And I didn't know whether I was going to do the store or a bar first. But it just fell into place and made sense for me to go with the store first. My goal had always been to open an on and off premise business situation at some point, but the on premise never happened in New York. And in 2003, I opened the store in Red Hook, Brooklyn, after finding a little hole in the wall that I could afford to get started with. It was a boarded up storefront, actually had concrete blocks in the window. It wasn't just boarded up, it was concrete blocked. In a neighborhood that was pretty rough around the edges. There was a meth clinic around the corner, and a whole lot of shenanigans in that neighborhood. The median income was $10,000. 3/4 of the population lived in subsidized housing. But it felt like the right space for me, and it turned out it was incredibly successful. And Red Hook's crazy now with real estate. But
wow, I mean, it's amazing to think about this, but you were part of the story of turning around Red Hook.
Yeah, I was part of that story. I wasn't. I can't take credit for all that went on in Red Hook, but I was definitely a part of it, good or bad. I mean, the word gentrification has lots of connotations, and I don't ever feel like a gentrifier, because I think there's a certain level of income that has to come with that. And I've scrapped a whole lot in my life to be where I am today, but I didn't come with a trust fund to open up anything. But yeah, I think the same thing here in my neighborhood in Birmingham. I found this property and it felt right. And everybody thought I was crazy, just like they did in Red Hook, Brooklyn. And I said, why not? Why doesn't every neighborhood deserve a good liquor store, no matter what the economics are?
Yeah. What were those early days like? I mean, who was like your average customer? What were you selling there in Red Hook? What was that like?
It was all over the place, and it's really funny to go back and look. One day I run across some old notes from the first few months, and it was hilarious because it was like, well, I painted my nails, I sold a bottle of Pappy. It's like, it was just like slow and sleepy because nobody knew me, and opening here in Birmingham was just like night and day. Like, we hit the ground running, and we've been just packed from the beginning. But our early customers were a lot of neighbors in Red Hook, spanning the demographics, Black and brown and young and old and all economics. And then once people discovered what I was doing, it just became like this Mecca destination spot where people came from all over New York, as well as, when they'd be people be traveling to New York, they'd make the effort to come out. Red Hook was like a 45-minute schlep from the closest subway stop. So it wasn't an easy place to get to. People had to really want to be there.
Mm-hmm. Now, in that first year, like we see on the nightly news of liquor store robberies all the time, and that was certainly an area at the time when you mentioned some of the shenanigans that were going on when you were moving in. Did you ever have any incidents early on, or was there any times that you were afraid to open up or close or anything like that because of?
I never had any crime, and I fully believe that you attract what you put out. And if you walk in fear, then you attract reasons to be afraid. I walked out of that store many nights with thousands of dollars after midnight and walked to my apartment. I never had anybody bother me. And this is a great story. I love telling this story because there were, a lot of people, like I said, 3/4 of the neighborhood population lived in New York's biggest housing project. And there was a gentleman who came in the store in the early days of it opening. And, the kind of guy that my warning bells would, that, you get the racist shit with your grits. Everybody does. It don't matter how much you're going to say you ain't racist. We all have stupid shit that runs through our heads. He walked in the door and I was like, he's about to fuck me up. Gold grill. He just looked like he was ready to come in there and raise some hell with me. Tried to just suppress all the crap that was running through my head and treat him like I was going to treat anybody else. And he became a great customer. He was a man of few words. He would bring his friends in. He bought the banana vodka to begin with. We finally moved him up to Charbet. So he was buying Charbet blood orange vodka. But the end of that story is one night we got to overhear him talking to some friends. And he said, "Yo, man, have you been to that woman's store? She treats you with respect. There's no bulletproof glass, and she's got really nice things in there." Boom. I mean, here's a man living in the housing projects who looks like he might be the kind of guy who's going to like take you down. And yet he wants to be treated with respect just like anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And again, I think that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, and just the personality you kind of showing through there, and what that means. But one thing I kind of want to touch on one more time before we go too much into your time here in New York, because you said that you were going to go all in. But what was that like pivotal moment, or what was that idea that said, yeah, I do want to go all in? Because you had come from a background that didn't have any alcoholic, you didn't drink anything growing up. You kind of abusive in the grandfather era. So kind of talk about like what made you want to do that as well.
Well, I got custody of a 14-year-old sister when I was 21 years old, and I needed, like many people who get into the liquor business, and some form of bartending to make money. And so I was bartending and cocktail waitressing on the side to just have some income to better support our household. Got bitten by the bug, and for years I just kind of dabbled in that way. I wasn't doing it full on. But yeah, sitting in my office at university one day, pushing a bunch of papers around my desk, I realized I was really spending a whole lot of my office time fucking off and researching drinks. And so I was like, maybe I need to really rethink this. I had a very cush job with great benefits, but a friend of mine who was a librarian once gave me a book. It's been around for a gazillion years and a million iterations, called What Color's Your Parachute? And if you actually go through that book and you do all the exercises, which are not easy, it really makes you sit and dig deep. It will give you an idea of what your heart's passion is career-wise. And so at the end of that, I was like, I need to be in the liquor business and I need to move to New York. So I literally just I quit my job, sold my house, sold my car, and then packed a moving truck and went to New York. But now, as there is often in a story that involves New York, there's a romance aspect of that, because I was dating a guy long distance for a long time in Indiana, and he had just said, well, let's finally get together. We'd been together for 4 years. He said, you want to go to Atlanta or New York? And I was like, fuck Atlanta. Let's move to New York together. He broke up with me before I actually did the move, but I took red lipstick and wrote on my mirror "for me," and I did it anyway.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, because that's actually, I was getting ready to ask, like, why New York of all places, right? Because sometimes, my wife, she spent an internship in New York one year. It's not an easy place to live. It'll chew you up and swallow you out, because it's very, very expensive to live in some of the parts of it and stuff like that. So interesting story on just how you got to New York.
If you want to be in the liquor business, because everybody wants to be in New York, so you have tremendous access to things. But I went to New York when I was 18 years old, I was 17, for a high school senior trip. And it was the first place I ever felt like I was home.
Yeah. I mean, it's a melting pot of all kinds of races and cultures and everything right there. And I think the one thing that I love about New York is, at least when you go, is you could go to a different restaurant every day of your life and you could never run out of places to go eat.
Yeah. But you could run out of money.
That's true.
Money real quick.
Well, you could live in New York. I mean, yeah, everybody wants to talk about rent and real estate, but you can live in New York economically. I mean, I did it for years, so.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's back to whiskey business here. So, let's talk about it's a package store, and we understand that most of the time that it's not whiskey that sells and keeps the door open; it's everything else that's around there. As much as Fred, to his chagrin, he has to understand how that works, right? But kind of talk about
unless you're LeNell.
unless you're LeNell. So kind of talk about, like, was there a niche or a market for whiskey that you saw and you were pushing it? Like, kind of talk about how you started getting into that business.
My main thing with how I started focusing on bourbon, when I opened my store, I didn't know shit about bourbon. That's just being honest. But it was my Southern connection. And so when I was sitting down and just trying to vision board my store concept, I was like, it just makes sense for me to make a big focus of this store be my Southern connection. And so, of course, bourbon, why else not? So, in those first months, the store was incredibly slow, and we were open till midnight. Things were definitely slow from 10 to midnight. So every night, 10 to midnight, I would pop something, taste it, and I'd be on straightbourbon.com. Like, what the hell? What's everybody saying? What is this? Get out there, just try to soak up as much as I could. And it just sort of, I was preaching bourbon before it became cool. And it wasn't even that, I wasn't trying to create a trend or whatever. I was just really just trying to be true to my Southern roots.
Well, I think if you're on straight bourbon, you were one of the early people that were really talking about it. I mean, that's the OG board, if you will. Well,
it was General Nelson. Everybody would gather for every bourbon festival.
And so did you kind of foster, because I know that a lot of people from straight bourbon still hang out. They still do the KBF kind of gatherings and stuff like that. Were you a part of that early group in those sort of gatherings too?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I always had my room reserved at the Nelson, and, that's how I met Chuck Cowdery. We had his straight bourbon book launch at one of the members' houses there in Kentucky. And but once the store became so busy, it was just impossible for me to stay as active on the board. I had to pull away, of course. I couldn't sit around and fuck off on the computer as much.
Absolutely. And so I guess, was that just business taking off just in general? Because you had mentioned at the very beginning, you painted your nails, sold a bottle. And then I guess at some point you hit the inflection point.
Yeah. I mean, a mentor told me when I opened, you're going to think you're dying for 3 years. And then something magical happens in the third year. And that's exactly what happened. It was third anniversary came around, and then all of a sudden it just took off.
Mm-hmm. So you start getting into whiskey. Talk about the selection that you started off with, and did it grow over time, as you got into bourbon and you tried to get your consumers into it?
Every bourbon I could get my hands on in New York, and there's a lot of availability there, and it didn't matter what it was. If it said bourbon on it, I put it on my shelf. We did we'd call cats and dogs tastings and do everything. It wasn't just all about trying to have Julian Van Winkle come in the store. It's even a funny story. The first time I met Julian was at one of the whiskey festivals in New York, and I was scared shitless. I was like, all right, so I just got to rock this. So I just put on some pink suede pants, some black high-heeled boots, walked up in, a sea of drunken men, and I walked up to Julian and handed him my business card and said, "You don't know me, but you need to." And I just walked away. We've, made friendships over the years, and we tell these stories, and it's hilarious. But he was I was just who the hell is this? So, he came to my store. We did a bottle signing in those early days, and I had people just packed. And then the black cars came from Lower Manhattan, and he just was looking at me. He's like, "What the hell? I've never done an event like this." And I was like, "Well, get ready. It's coming. If you don't know it, you're about to just be blown away." And he was like, "Oh, okay." So, I was an early believer in what he was doing with the Pappy label. And when I closed the store in 2009, I still had Pappy on the shelf. I still had Red Hook Rye on the shelf.
Wow.
It was sat in my basement for years.
So speaking of Red Hook Rye, let's get into that. How did that happen?
Much in the same way as anything I believe in happens. It just happens naturally. That wasn't anything I clamored for. Drew and I became friends through the industry. I remember the first time I met him, he came to one of the whiskey festivals, and the room was all abuzz because, Evan had been a hermit for so long. And it was like, "There's a Coles Bean here. Oh my God." And Drew, like me, was very matter of fact, just cut through the bullshit, just tell things like it was. And we hit it off, stayed in touch. And once, I think we were just hanging out in Bardstown, and he said, "We should do a barrel. We should do a label for you." And we did. It wasn't a whole lot of.
Not a whole lot of thought process. It just say, "Hey, sure, why not? Let's do it."
Let's do it.
You kind of created this iconic label first of all, Red Hook Rye just has such a beautiful name to it. And even if you're not familiar with the Red Hook area, like you could live in Boise, Idaho and not be familiar with that area. And you're like, wow, Red Hook is such a cool name. And then you see that arm with the tat. Was that your idea? I mean, who came up with the name and that art?
Well, I came up with the name because I was trying to do something to honor my neighborhood. I'm into alliteration, so that was a natural thing. The artwork was the Brooklyn artist who did my postcard artwork. And I don't know if you ever saw my postcards, but they were incredibly racy. He was just hilarious. And he would always push, even for me, he would push my boundaries of racy. But, I was talking to marketing firms about designing the label, and he just showed up and he was like, can I give it a go? Can I just like throw something together and you tell me whether you like it or not before you like commit to these big firms to design a label for you? And he showed up in the store one day and he was like, well, I'm trying to be, you're trying to be true to the neighborhood by calling it Red Hook Rye. I'd like to be true to the history of the neighborhood. And this being on the waterfront of Brooklyn and stevedores being a part of the history of, big burly man on the docks unloading ships and whatnot. And so, yeah, he just presented it and I was like, done. That's the label right there.
I mean, seriously, it is a kind of a showstopper. You're walking around, you see that label, even if you don't know anything about whiskey or you want to taste it, you want to look at that beautiful piece of art because that's what it is. It's art.
Yeah.
So it's gorgeous.
Yeah, he was so much fun to work with and just trying to do things outside the box. I mean, there's so many boring whiskey labels out here. I'm working on another one right now that's going to really make you laugh a lot. And you're going to be like, LeNell's crazy as hell. I showed it to Britt Colesbank. She was like, we have got to do this. And it's using a local artist here in Birmingham. And I'm keeping it under wraps for now.
Well, give us till the end of the show to get it out of you. Take us through the process of selecting the whiskey for Red Hook Rye. Because yes, the label is gorgeous, but I've got Red Hook Rye as one of the top 5 ryes I've ever tasted. I mean, it's incredible. So take us through selecting that whiskey.
Well, as you know, there were 4 barrels, and the first barrel, Drew and I, with a couple other folks, were just in the warehouse, literally like just walking over barrels and popping bongs and tasting whiskey and passing it around and like, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And that number 1 is still my favorite of all 4 barrels. I mean, it was really just being able to pick kind of the cream of the crop. The barrel was phenomenal.
Do you remember some of the ages that were on these? I can't bring up my notes right now.
The first one was 23 years and the rest were 24. Not a lot of people know. And I go, to me, Pappy 23 sucks. I won't even drink it. The age of bourbon at that level is usually, it's overwooded and it won't hold up in a glass. I tell people all the time, you can spend a fortune on Pappy 23, like let it sit on your counter for half a second, come back, and it's like, all oxidized and cloudy and funky. But what made that whiskey so special at that age is that they had dumped the barrels that they had initially bought and refilled bourbon barrels with the rye. So that whiskey could sit there for a little longer at that age and not be so over the top with wood. And we didn't really talk about that. We didn't market it, but that's one thing that made all those barrels so special. And then it's been so long, I don't remember who was with me on each pick, but at one point I drove down with Don Lee from New York, who had worked with me a little bit in the shop, and he's now, cocktail rock star.
Yeah, he's like a bartending god.
He is. He's amazing, and I really treasure him. He came down with me, and another guy got his start just kind of working with me in the shop. We had at one point, Veach came. I can't remember which barrel that was. But
it's been so many good barrels, you can't remember.
I know. Well, when Veach was there, I remember, we were just passing a glass around and we all had to agree on it. It was, I had to pass my lips first and I thought it was worthy. And then I passed it around and we were all like, nah, yeah, or maybe. It had to be like a all out, like, yeah, that one.
So very scientific process kind of. It sounds like exactly what happens in barrel selections nowadays. So it's just,
exactly.
Yeah, you just had the luxury of being in there quite early when stuff like that was around.
Yeah. That's never going to happen again. I've had so many people reach out to me. There's a store in Red Hook that asked me if they could buy the rights to it. And I was like, that's not going to exist anymore. Like, that label is done. There's a Red Hook Rye beer. Like, if somebody even tried to launch that today, they'd be sued by somebody making beer that wouldn't like that label to be around.
So, LeNell, I'm going to be your agent here. The asking price, they want to come in and they want to buy the Red Hook Rye rights. What are you thinking, Kenny? Started out at 15 million. Is that a good number?
Ooh, that's up there. Maybe 5. I'd say 5.
Okay, so I was going too high. All right, so LeNell, we'll come in and negotiate this for you. Get a $5 million deal. We won't even take a cut. We just want the whiskey. What Red Hook Rye? What Red Hook Rye do you have left?
I don't even have any.
You don't have any left?
I'm not. I sold all of it to raise money to finish my store. I had such a struggle getting the money I needed to finish construction. It took me 7 years to get open here.
Wow.
And, I really didn't even realize what I was sitting on. I'd been out of it for a bit as a new mom and having been out of the country for 2 years. And my ex-husband kept saying, you have got to pull this whiskey out. You have no idea. He's like, everybody at my bar is asking me if you'll sell it to them. And I'm like, whatever. Like, come on. Got some Pappy and some Red Hook Rye. Big deal. And then one day I called and talked to Drew and I was like, hey man, I'm really hurting and I need to get this business open. I had divorced and, things were really tough. It's a single mom. And he was like, well, I know Doug sold some of his bottles for like $3,700 or something. So I know you can get around that. And I put a whole set of 4 out, bottles number 2. And I couldn't get anybody to offer me more than $20,000 for all 4. And I had everybody under the sun messaging me and some even like calling me names. It was a side of the sexist bullshit in this business that I hadn't been exposed to in a long time and kind of threw me. I was so disrespected in that process. And, and then you see now, like those same guys who are like, call me a cunt for trying to sell 4 number 2s for $20,000 will turn around now and sell 1 for 16. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll just stick to my retailing. Y'all can play around with your bootlegging. I'm done with that.
Yeah, that is unfortunately a really nasty side of our culture that, it's very pocketed to the enthusiast side. Like you don't really see that, but I'm sorry you went through that. I really am sorry you went through that as somebody who loves this community. And I'd love it if that would stop, but sadly it won't. And I will tell you that if they attacked you for being a woman, they say similar things to men. I've seen this time and time again in those groups is like, when it comes to this stuff, people go overboard in the private messages and then they get very dirty, very mean. And I'm very sorry you had to go through that. It was
so different from the environment of like a straightbourbon.com or bourbonenthusiast.com experience I'd had where, yeah, there might be a tiff here and there, but it was overall like very civilized. And the level of bourbon mania going on in these secret pages is something that really disgusts me.
And here's the thing too, Linnell, how much do those people really know? And what do they really add to the conversation?
Yeah, I mean,
a lot of them are just wanting money.
Drew and I've had many conversations about that kind of thing. And, I'm grateful. I'm grateful that exists in many ways because I did end up selling my bottles and that money put the roof on my store. But at the same time, there's, I don't know. I've always been about building the relationships. It's never been about just the business or a barrel of whiskey for me. And when it gets to this level of just dog eat dog, who's got the biggest collection and who can get the most money for it. It just bores me.
Yeah, absolutely. And and I think you kind of hit you said it right there. Last I checked, I think some of those Red Hooks were 15, even up to 18,000 a bottle, something like that. And I guess, like, what's your thought on that valuation or price? With a career as a master distiller spanning almost 50 years, as well as a Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Famer and having over 100 million people taste his products, Steve Nally is a legend of bourbon who for years made Maker's Mark with expertise and precision. His latest project is with Bardstown Bourbon Company, a state-of-the-art distillery in the heart of the bourbon capital of the world. They're known for their popular Fusion series. However, they're adding something new in 2020 with a release named The Prisoner. It starts as a 9-year-old Tennessee bourbon that is then finished in The Prisoner Wine Company's French oak barrels for 18 months. The good news is you don't have to wait till next year to try it. Steve and the team at Bardstown Bourbon Company have teamed up with Rack House Whiskey Club. Rack House Whiskey Club is a Whiskey of the Month club on a mission to uncover the best flavors and stories that craft distilleries across the U.S. have to offer. Their December box features a full-size bottle of Bardstown's Fusion series and a 200 milliliter bottle of The Prisoner. There's also some cool merch inside, and as always, with this membership, shipping is free. Get your hands on some early release Bardstown bourbon by signing up at rackhousewhiskeyclub.com. Use code PURSUIT for $25 off your first box. What's your thought on that valuation or price? I mean, is that something that I know you probably never dreamed it would be like that, but like, yeah. What is your really, like, your gut thought? Do you really think it's worth that? Or you kind of like, man, that's just crazy shit?
Well, it's like, you've heard this a million times. Is anything worth it? I mean, that's subjective. If you think it's worth it and you got that kind of cash, then it's worth it. But, I spent $17,000 on my business property, $5,000 on the house I'm living in. When I see these kind of numbers, it makes me quiver a little bit, because I'm like, wow, like that's like a place somebody could live, and you're just going to piss that in a couple of hours. So yeah, it's a little disturbing sometimes, but then, if that's the kind of cash flow you have, who am I to judge you for spending that kind of money on a bottle of whiskey? I mean, there's people who have, that's just a blip in their bank account. So, I bless it and say, may you be even better and more well off to benefit somebody.
So, Kenny, there's a retailer in California selling a bottle of Red Hook Rye for $30,000.
Well, you say selling, they may have it out there, but that doesn't mean it's being bought. And it's just like the guy in New York with Lee Tackman bought that set that I just mentioned, the number 2s. He bought some other bottles for me as well. And then when he put that Red Hook Rye set out for $175,000 on his website, it went like wildfire. And I messaged him and I was like, you spent less than $4,000 a bottle on some of that stuff. So like, where's that number coming from? And he just laughed. He's like, man, it's just marketing. Everybody's talking about it and it went viral. And he was a marketing genius for doing it. He brought a ton of people to his business because they were all like, oh my God, is that a Red Hook Rye for $175,000? That's crazy. But, people came to the store to talk about it or see what else he had. Somebody sent me a link the other day. Christie's auction house had a Red Hook Rye with starting bid of $20,000.
Oof. Okay. I think we've talked about the Red Hook Rye a lot and the crazy valuation.
Hold on.
Because
found a bottle for $50,000.
Okay.
Get my checkbook out. I hear 60. All right.
Okay. Well, let's wait until the next. Maybe that should just be like the new index. Like it's the Red Hook Rye index to see like how crazy is the bourbon Richter scale getting year after year.
Maybe that's what you should do with your stuff, Kenny. Is the just start pricing it $1,000 to $5,000 a bottle, and then people go crazy for it.
See what happens. I'm all about it.
The funny thing is, Red Hook Rye number 1, I sold those for $75 a bottle.
There you go.
Holy.
But even back then, this was what year was this? 2008, 9?
I think the Red Hook Rye started in what? Was it 2007? I can't remember the year, but yeah.
And even back then, 75 it probably might have been a lot for a lot of folks,
Well, yeah, I mean, it was, but by barrel 4, we went up to 350 and people were like, whoa, she's getting crazy. Yeah.
And so let's kind of like move it forward, because those bottles help build the business down in Alabama. So kind of talk about 7 years to get this up and running. Kind of that's a long time to really work on something. I mean, kind of talk about was there other than getting money? I mean, were there any other kind of like hiccups and hurdles that you had to face along the way to make that happen? Because everybody knows that in Alabama, it's really easy to just open up liquor stores.
Opening is pretty easy. I mean, it's not difficult to open a private store here. The liquor licensing process is not dreadful at all.
See, I figure with control states, it'd be a nightmare.
It's not at all. And it was even cheaper to open here than it was to open in New York as far as licensing and everything. The challenges it was mostly financial. And I said I would never do this again unless I owned the property. I bought the property, thought that it would be pretty easy to get financing, having done this before. And I learned real quickly that since I'd been closed for so long, it was considered a new startup. I brought my husband here from Mexico, and we had to go through naturalization for him. I got pregnant. There was just a whole lot of stuff on my plate. Then, it was a great lesson in what a woman goes through when you decide to start life again as a single mother, because it was very difficult for me to, one, make a living while I was trying to open the store. And there were plenty of people who were like, yeah, we don't mind, come over here and bartend. I bartended a shit ton of private parties. I mean, I just like pimped myself out, made things work. But the financing, like so many people be like, oh yeah, you know what you're doing. But, once you've been open for 3 years, get money from us. It's the classic, like once you don't need it, you can get it. And there's a lot of systemic racism, and I call that out regularly, and that doesn't go over real well. Neighborhoods who are predominantly African American really struggle with getting investment money from banks oftentimes. So yeah, there was a whole lot of challenges to jump through, but yeah, I just took it. I took it one day at a time, one moment at a time, and it took me 7 years, but I did it.
I'm glad you did. And I'll tell you, I don't know the strength that you have exuded in that time frame. Most people would give up.
Yeah, it was really tough, but it made me go deep. And I think the biggest thing in going through that challenge, I had become a caricature of myself in New York in many ways. I had built this business, and I had built this character called Linnell. And going through what I did to get open again here, I feel like I am more true to myself and more rooted and grounded in the core of my being than ever before. So that's good. There's always some good to come through those difficult times.
So I'm just thinking about if I were to put myself in your shoes, if I were a single parent and having to go through all that and face the banking challenges, I probably would have moved on to something else. And so I kind of like just the human element of us all, why didn't you give up? Why was this store so important to you to start?
I knew the impact this business could have on this neighborhood, and I'm very much a believer in the impact of business on social justice. I've always been that way. And this neighborhood, when I came to visit it, to look at this property, just grabbed me by the heart and wouldn't let go. And neighbors just were like, we need you here, and we're behind you here. And I had neighbors who said, when I first came here, they didn't even know me. While you're trying to figure stuff out, here, live in my house, or here, we've got this. I showed up here with a suitcase, and next thing I know, like people had just like showed up with stuff to like help me get through that moving from Mexico period. So I felt that in Red Hook too. There was a sense of community, and so there was, I really did feel like I was being pulled by a higher calling through that whole process. And I knew the impact was going to be bigger than what I even understood. And I many times have had conversations with beautiful souls like Britt Colesveen and just sit and say, and just in tears, like, I don't know why this is happening the way it is, but there is something on the other side of this that I'm meant to do. And one of my big things with opening the cafe concept next to the store that I feel so strongly about is that this business is ready to be turned on its head. And we've beat up people in hospitality. We overwork them. We don't respect home life. You have souls like Sean Brock, who cleaned his shit up, and he's being really outspoken about this too. We've lost a lot of people in this business. People don't want to talk about it, but it's overconsumption and drug use and just not taking care of themselves. And I really want my whole business concept with the store and the cafe concept next door to be about hope and healing. And how can you have an alcohol business? And I'm still figuring this out, but have the message that you can build community around consumption and it not get to the level where we're fucking ourselves up. And I know that's deep, but that's where I am.
That's where we need to go. I mean, in the last, from Sasha Tresky to, the gentleman we lost in Miami to Anthony Bourdain. I mean, we've lost so many iconic people in the hospitality space. And, I've been covering this industry for a long time. And we were looking at Tales of the Cocktail, and almost a quarter of the seminars are about taking care of yourself. So the industry knows that we have to change, or we won't have an industry anymore, or at least we won't have the talent.
Yeah.
So I'm very thankful that you've seen this and you're pushing for it.
Well, and as a mom too, I see how hard it is for women to stay in this business and raise a family, because I don't care how wonderful you are as a dad, 9 times out of 10, the woman is still doing most of the child care. And so to still be like the one who's taking care of the babies and more than likely doing the laundry and washing the dishes and running a business or staying, as a manager of a restaurant or whatever it is, it's really difficult for women. And that's another aspect of what I'm hoping to do with this business is prove that it can be done in a way that respects and supports women. I was a breastfeeding mom when I was working behind a bar, and like, who offers a woman pump breaks behind a bar? Nobody. My breasts would be engorged. I'm like freaking out. Like, what am I supposed to do? I'd like, how do I hide a breast pump in the bathroom and the paper towel holder? I mean, those conversations need to be had. It's not just about young punks that we just like wear out till their bodies won't handle it anymore, or we run everybody out of the business that, has a lot to contribute to the business. So yeah,
I have a proposal for you.
What's that?
Let's do a seminar at Tales of the Cocktail next year.
Oh, Lord. I boycotted Tales back in 2008, but I know it's a new world now.
Yeah, it's changed. Kenny, I got to tell you, it's this kind of passion that is really outside of whiskey, but within whiskey, that to me is the future of our culture. So our culture cannot live on whiskey alone. It has to come together as a community, and this recognition that there's potentially substance abuse problems, that is huge. That is huge. And she brought up Sean Brock, friend of mine, friend of yours, and he's had a very public battle with alcoholism. I mean, Sean, that guy can't even go to the grocery store without it getting in the New York Times. But he gets covered a lot. But I want to come back to you a little. Something you brought up is the woman angle, and I'm very passionate about this. Of like, creating an environment in the whiskey industry that women feel comfortable in. It's a big reason why I wrote the book I did. And then going back to your label, you kind of a little bit of the Rosie Riveter angle feel to it. Do you feel like it is better today than it was 10, 15 years ago as a woman? Taking out the creepy guys on the bourbon secondary markets, but do you feel like today is better than it was 10, 15 years ago as a woman in whiskey?
Well, of course, there's been tremendous progress, and we have more women in the business, in leadership capacity than we ever have, probably. So yeah, I mean, of course, the answer is yes. Yeah, it's made progress. I mean, is there still like a shit ton of room? Yeah. And do we need to?
What are some areas we need improvement upon?
Marketing. As you know, I'm sure you hear this from so many women. We're all tired of seeing the good old boy marketing. When Matthew McConaughey got involved with Wild Turkey, there's always, oh, I'm going to revamp Wild Turkey. And I'm like, oh, it still looks like a good old boy backslapping club. Okay, well, how was that so like groundbreaking? I mean, the commercials were beautiful, but like, what boundary did that push? Marketing, yeah. I mean, it doesn't need to be like, oh, look at this beautiful face drinking some whiskey. It needs to be real. It needs to be raw. That's one of the, and marketing is powerful. Marketing not only with real women, but people of color. Let's talk about some, LGBTQ up in here too. Let's just throw all that up in there, And so we're just starting to scratch the surface of the conservative whiskey world.
I agree. You see a lot of that today, and hopefully we can see more of that change and progress, as this comes along. And I think having a voice like yours, being really outspoken, and there's a lot of industry people that listen to this podcast, and they're going to hopefully take note of that too, and kind of see that change. But we are
like trying to work on website ideas. My website is still just a landing page and looks like shit. But talking to companies about website ideas, and I'm saying the same kind of things I'm just saying to you. Like, no, we need images that reflect my customers. Why can't we have two black hands toasting, or two women looking like they're celebrating their wedding? And the marketing guys at these website companies are like, well, I mean, those images don't really exist very easily. I'm like, okay, well then let's take some freaking pictures. Let's create the images. Like, don't just give me this excuse of like, you don't have those images in some stock file. Yeah, all that's powerful. Like what we see, what becomes the norm.
I don't know. I've seen a lot of those photos. I think you need new marketing people.
Exactly, right? And that's why my webpage still sucks, because I haven't found the right company.
So we are kind of running up on the top of this hour real quick, and I kind of want to circle back to just to your story again to kind of wrap this up. And so 7 years, the door's open. Kind of talk about what business has been like, because you mentioned the first store, it was kind of like, all right, it'll build up. There's an inflection point, and you said this one was just hit the ground running on day one. Kind of talk about what that's been, and whether it's been a blessing or curse with work and everything else.
It's been a huge blessing. I'm very grateful, and it's just I'm amazed. When I opened in New York, I really worked the store pretty much by myself for 3 years, and my boyfriend at the time, when he got off work, would come in and put in time as well. But it took really in New York 3 years before I could hire a full-on team. And I have 2 full-time staff right now, and I'm interviewing to hire 2 more. So I have a total of 4 in the first year. I'm already there. I'm at sales in 1 year here that it took me 4 years to get to in New York City.
Wow. That's impressive to be able to do that in Birmingham and in New York.
And, I just did my employees' annual reviews with a sip of Appleton 50, no bourbon.
It's okay. You're still speaking to Fred's heartstrings there.
Appleton 50, isn't that good?
I know, it was incredible.
Oh my God, it's so good.
Makes me want to definitely go do a staff trip to Jamaica. But one of the things that came out of that is my staff's like, you have kind of been backslapping that you've not been in the store micromanaging, because in New York, it was very, very difficult for me to walk away and let employees do their thing. Because I had oozed that store for so long. I mean, many times I slept on the floor of that store and got up and just kept going. But to see the success and just for me to be at a place of growth too, that I've been able to let go and trust employees already to start managing things that took me years in New York to get to. Yeah, it's we're going to start working on the cafe concept. That's the next thing. And that's going to be probably about 2 years out, but it's a huge project. I'm taking on a big Greek revival old historic home that's right next to the store. That's going to be pretty amazing project. Tried to convince Sean Brock to come down here and play with me, but
send a few text messages. It might happen.
I did, but we haven't snagged him yet.
And so we did have one question in the chat that came from Mikey Conrad, and because you've got this history of kind of opening up businesses that are more of like in impoverished areas, and he asked a question: are you working with other organizations or partnering with other stores to help in that sort of same socioeconomic background to help start their business and kickstart it off the ground as well?
That's a great question, and it's something that I do feel very strongly about. There's been some talk about trying to form like a business association, a merchants association in this area. This area does not have a whole lot of business at all. The old business corridor is pretty much gone. There's a lot of talk with connecting our neighborhood. We have millions of dollars of development going on a mile down the road. So there's been a lot of talk of trying to connect that and how we do that to keep mom and pop businesses a part of that and it not just be a whole bunch of chains. But my long-term goal is to really get to a point where I can mentor and help other, especially women, get started in business in a way that I think is so needed. Women have got to support women financially in getting our businesses off the ground because we understand each other in a way nobody else is. As far as, especially like balancing home life and kids and everything. And I don't have any definite plans, but that's something that I think a lot about. I haven't had a free moment to focus on that right now, but I will in time.
Oh, that's great. And so as we close this out, I got one more question to ask of you. So you went and you sold all your Red Hooks. I'm sure that there's some part of you that has a little bit of hole in your heart, but maybe that hole's sort of getting filled by knowing that you're building something bigger and better. And then earlier this year, you had done 2 more Willet picks. You'd done your light side and your dark side. Tell me you kept at least a few bottles of that, and you're not gonna do the same thing again.
I did. I had a few friends who were like, "Don't be stupid this time." And I wouldn't call it being stupid. I mean, I just was like, "Woo! Everybody enjoy the whiskey before." But I didn't keep a lot. I kept bottles 1 through 6 of each one.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the new project you have? And remember, this won't come out for a long time, so no one's going to know for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about it somewhat. I'm not going to give out all the details, but there's a distiller here in Alabama that I'm excited about, Seth Detling, and
he's cool.
Project we're working on together. And no, it's not going to be a 23-year-old rye. But I went down and met him and tasted out of barrel, and he had a one barrel that really pulled my heartstrings. That it's going to be fun.
He sent me some stuff too that to me was really reminiscent of a couple honey barrels that I had from Willet. So I can see, I could see like your heartstrings lining up there. Like, no, he's a good distiller.
He's a good person, and again, it's like with Drew, that project just happened because we were building a friendship and it happened naturally. So I'm not out here trying to replace a Red Hook Rye. That's never going to happen. I felt the butterflies when I went down and met with Seth. And so I told him, when I feel this feeling, I got to follow up on it. So let's make this magic happen. So.
Oh, that's fantastic. So as we kind of wrap this up here, at least we got a little bit of teaser. We'll see what's happening next. Maybe we'll get back with you here in a year and we'll kind of see where you are with that project. It'd be good to get a kind of a whole circle feedback here. But for anybody that wants to go to LeNell's Beverage Boutique and find out more about it, how do they do that?
Like I said, the website sucks. Our Facebook page is very active. All our social media is at LeNell's Beham. That's LeNellsBham.
And what's your address? Because I have a feeling that someone's going to change the direction of where they're driving right now as they're listening to this to come to your store.
We're at 1208 32nd Street North. We're a mile up from Topgolf.
There you go. Get your pint and head on over to Topgolf. Save yourself a few bucks.
They're trying to fight that in Louisville.
I don't sell pints, man. Come on.
Oh, no pints there. Okay, never mind.
Bad, Kenny.
We're bougie. We don't sell pints over here.
I call it cheeky.
There you go. So, Linnell, I want to say thank you again so much for coming on the show. I mean, for us, I mean, I had met you originally at the Willett bar opening about, I think, maybe 2 years ago now. And really this opportunity to kind of really sit down, capture your story, and really be able to spread the message of really what you're doing, not only just for whiskey. Whiskey's one aspect, but the human element and what you're doing to really promote that. I think it speaks a lot for yourself and what you're trying to do to help impact and change the industry. You know, it's just one person trying to really kind of scale that up too. So thank you again for coming on the show and doing that.
Thank you for being a gentleman in your chase to get us to sit down together.
Absolutely. I do my best for that. And if you want to know more about us, you can follow Bourbon Pursuit on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you like the show, you want to support the show, you want to ask questions and see this live as we do these recordings, you go and support us at patreon.com/Bourbon Pursuit. And if you want some good reading material, make sure you go check out Bourbon Plus magazine as well. We've even got some things going on with our Patreon community and getting Bourbon Plus subscriptions. So make sure you go and do that. Thank you, everybody that was watching this live. It's been a pleasure. And we'll see everybody next week.
Cheers.